Good to go.
All right. All right. So, Jim, you said you had a little bit of an intro that you wanted to.
Yeah, well, I think that first of all, I think this is a wonderful forum, and I'm pleased to be part of it, and pleased for your willingness to look at my photos. Pulling out photos, as most of you know, is not an easy task. A lot of them have lived where they've lived for a long time without ever having seen anything other than the computer. Going back through them, it made for me. Now, Andy asked me to not make this a religious experience, so I will do the best I can to make this short. But the question comes up: why are you taking photos anyway? That's for me. I'm not a technical guy, exactly, and I do, like to try to get a decent photo, but the ins and outs of photography elude me to some extent. And the reason for taking them, I think, comes down to being pretty well awed by the whole thing, that the camera can do what it does, and that we can be presented with subjects that we're presented with that are just unbelievable. It's outstanding to see the colors, to be in the environment, to go back to it and know you've been there. So that's kind of just the beginning of what it means for me to start looking at, well, what am I going to show these folks, and who cares about them anyway? So let's have a look at them, and if I can figure out the technology here. Incidentally, Tom, are you going to do how to do damage control on your equipment in the water, or is this computer stuff?
It's primarily, I'm primarily going to go from before you ever, right up to camera selection through to what do you do on the short term, and when you're done taking the pictures and you're in travel, and then long term, how do you protect the data? So it's less about recovery of damaged stuff, but it'll be more about all the steps that I take along the way to make sure that I don't lose images. Gotcha.
Okay. So it's not about what happens when you're at 100 feet and you've got water coming into the camera.
Not exactly, no. Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but that's not the concentration.
Full disclosure.
Been there though.
So
Full disclosure, I'm on my third Canon SL2. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. And there have been incidents along the way that I lost everything.
You'll appreciate one of my photos then.
Here we go. Is it the water coming in? All right, here we go. Let's see if I can make this work. We decided that we're going to do this as a slideshow, and I will be able to stop it along the way to explain if there needs explanation. So this first photo, it's kind of an introduction photo. This was in the Garden of Queens in Cuba. And I just came across this photo because it seems to me to really capture what we're about. We're going off into a dive, and we don't know what we're going to see. And we're going to skip around from one venue to another here as we go, and I'll tell you where we are. This is a black and white for the obvious reason that often we go black and white when the real photo hasn't come out as well as we'd like it to. Black and white cures a lot of ills. This next photo is from Cocos, which probably most of you know is an island. It's of the same sort of geologic formation as the Galapagos and Mapello, and it's known for its scalloped hammerhead sharks. I chose this photo because it had so much action in it. It's, there's bubbles all over the place, which I'm assuming is from the person in front of me, I would imagine. The shark is making a sharp 90-degree turn up and getting out of there, probably because of the bubbles. And there's all sorts of fish going on in the background, and you might be able to pick out another shark or two as well. So there was a lot of motion in this photo that I really enjoyed. And again, the colors. fairly true to life. All right, I hit the space bar. Okay, so this was my award-winning photo at the North Shore Frogmen's Club. I was not a member at the time, and I entered this as a non-member. I may have been the only entrant, I'm not sure. And I won first place, of course. But the thing I liked so much about the photo is that this was totally unintended. It was one of those moments where you almost just get to see the tail. And I managed to get a shot off in time. And it just came out beautifully. And the foreground and the blue background with the dark black and white, whatever this thing is. What is it? Somebody tell me. I've forgotten.
Eagle Ray?
Eagle Ray, yeah. It's just, you know, it was just great. So that was one of my photos that I actually entered into a contest, the only time. Also Cocos. Cocos, again, one of the great things about Cocos is that it has both the macro and it also has, you know, the wide angle. And we've just seen some wide angle. This isn't quite a macro, but it's small stuff. This is a frogfish, probably at about 60 or 80 feet of water. They're fairly common in one area. And this was a pretty nice one. Oops, that's actually how it should have looked. Yeah, like that. Again, colors. Nature presents us with some beautiful stuff. The other thing about photography is that I find a lot of humor in it. And you know, here's all these tiny little fish. I think they're cardinal fish. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay. Yeah, no. And they're hiding in this urchin. These are the urchins that give you the Cocos tattoos, if you've heard about that before. Very rarely do you leave Cocos without a couple of blue spots and holes in your wetsuit. And these guys with immunity are just hanging out in it and don't dare come near me because you're going to be in trouble. Humor. I don't know what to say here. This is Cocos. This is at Alcyon, which is a seamount at about 90 feet. I'd never seen the head of a moray out before. And they're almost like puppets. And these two were doing, they may be a male, female, and maybe a courtship going on here, I'm not sure. These two were doing a dance back and forth and waving back and forth at one another. And going back to the photo, it's just, I just find it precious. I guess what do they call it when you take an animal and you humanize it? There's a word for that, but that's what I come up with. So we'll go beyond that. This guy was another accident of sorts. I've been following him. This is the first time I've started doing macro photography. This is also Cocos. It's with a 60mm lens, a fixed lens. And, you know, he turned and looked at me and I went pop and there it is. And it just happened. And it's one of those photos that you get every so often if you're paying attention. And that happened. All right, so this is the real macro stuff. This is a little blenny, I believe, hiding in a hole. That first photo shows you how tiny he is there. This guy is a little bit closer, and the resolution gets better if I leave it sit for a second. And this fellow was with the 60mm lens, and it's just a kick to be able to take a photo of something like this and look at it. That gets
I
back.
love the little teeth.
Yeah, I mean, that gets back into the religious experience again. full disclosure, I don't have much religion, but so anyway, there he is. And the little antennas sticking up in the air, you know, it's like, okay. Where are we going now? Let's see. Oh yeah, again, this I think is the last Coco's photo. Look at the tassels on top of the dorsal fin on this thing. Anybody have a name for this?
Some kind of a hawkfish, I believe.
Oh, yes, thank you. Exactly. And it's it's unbelievable. And in the background is another one of those sea urchins. This is a show-off photo. We won't stay long here. This is at Guadalupe, off of Mexico, out of Ensenada, Mexico, where they lure in the great whites, and you're in a cage, and relatively safe, and they're just absolutely magnificent animals. If you haven't done this, it doesn't take, you don't have to scuba dive. You're just on a regulator from the boat. And it's really quite the experience. And water's cold.
Now, what's cold? What kind of temperature you're talking
Oh
about?
yeah, well, they say it's cold. It's like in the 70s.
Oh.
You know? Yeah, right. You know, but if you're in there for an hour and you're not moving because you're weighted down heavily, so that you can stand in these cages, and you're not really moving, so it does get cold after a while. There's no question about it. Not for us New Englanders. This again is the Garden of Queens. And what I really like about this photo, these are silky sharks. They tend to just hang out around the boat when you're finishing your dive. And you know, there they are. And you just come up through and you look at them and they look at you, and that's that. But I love the surface of the water here. The texture of the water and the fish against that texture, for me, is just eye-popping. And again, this is the nature of the camera. And if you have a better camera, you get a better photo. I shouldn't say that so glibly, but I think that equipment is part of the genius of some of the photos we see. Incidentally, I erased 3 days worth of photos on that trip, Tom. We can talk about that later. You know, when you're loading photos in and there's a screen comes up and I went delete, and then I went, oh shoot, there we go.
Yeah, that hurts.
Yeah, that hurt a lot. So this is another one of those photos that just, you know, it's the sun coming down through the water. Go figure. I don't know. It's a favorite of mine. It says something to me. Okay, so we're in Maine now. And we're off of Andy, you'll be familiar with this. We're off of Long Sands Beach in what we call the Bay, which is just, if you drew a line from the mouth of the harbor over to the Nubble, it would be everything to the west of that line. And this is a sunfish working its way around. And we were lucky enough to come upon it. And I hopped in the water with a snorkel and mask and fins and the camera. And there it is. This is black and white because, as you can see, the photo is not that clear. So the black and white helped it a lot. But this is you folks are probably familiar with sunfish. They're this truncated fish. They don't have much of a tail. They can actually jump out of the water. And they don't really have any predators except boats, primarily.
Now, how did it react when you jumped into the water?
No, it's pretty, let's just get there. Not much. I mean, it doesn't want to swim into me, so it's going to swim away, but it didn't dive, and it just kept along its merry way. Sometimes with a boat, if you come up close to it, you can drift alongside of them for quite a while, but you can spook them and they'll dive, they'll go down. The mouth on this thing and the nose is just comical. It's absolutely incredible. And that is the color of the water. That was it. This again was close up. The black fin here on its side, the pectoral fin, I would believe, and the eye were just absolutely dark. And I thought when I was re-looking at the photos, I was thinking that fin, it was some sort of a parasite on the fish, but it's not. It is actually the pectoral fin. And then lastly, there's a black and white that just shows the whole fish to give you some sense of it. It's probably about 5-6 feet long.
Wow.
Oh, okay, we're back to the Sea of Cortez. And this is another one of those photos that just, it's just all these fish you're in the middle of. And it's, I don't know what to say about it. It's just that much to say. The next photo is similar, but it manages to pick out some of the individuals. And here again, what the camera can do is amazing to me, because this is not necessarily the way you see it when you're in the water. But when you look at the photo, you've got these fish in the foreground that are crystal clear, and to my level of crystal clear. And they're all just doing what fish do. Somebody dislodged this, give me the word, folks, this nudibranch. I think this is a Spanish shawl.
Yep.
I believe. Andy?
Yep, it is.
Okay, 10 points for me. Somebody dislodged it and it was swimming to get to something else to hold on to. And I took the opportunity to take the photo. And again, look at the colors that nature presents us with. It's just, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And there were lots of these kinds of things in the Sea of Cortez. Andy, I think you were there recently.
Yeah,
said
yeah,
you
a few years ago. Yeah, it's a nice
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah,
Wonderful place to dive.
I'm going back. I'm going to do the Explore Baja a year from September. Taking photos here was somewhat challenging because the bottom could be very bright and the sun here was very bright. And so getting darker images against the bright background was often challenging. Does anybody know a name for this one, Andy?
No, I can't remember. I know what it is, but I can't come up with the name now.
Yeah, it's a nudibranch. It's another nudibranch. This, I believe, is more of a slug. Is that?
Yeah, a flatworm, I think.
Flatworm, pardon me. Yes, exactly. Again, the favorite photos, just because they knock me out, being what they are. Colors here, shape. Check this out. It's sea anemone against the white. These are all shells, so this is not easy to. Lightroom helps a lot. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Lightroom. It's very forgiving. It takes a terrible photo and can give you what you were looking at. And they're just, in the breeze, they're just in the current, washing around. Again, colors. This guy was pretty unconcerned about anybody. Whoops, yeah, let him go. So this has a story. So this is a blenny goby. What is this thing? It's a jawfish, right? Maybe it's a little jawfish.
Looks like a jawfish.
Yeah. So there's these giant jawfish. This is a small one. And this snake is in his hole. the snake wants to see if there's something to eat in there. And if you can see the expression on this fish, which is his natural expression, but he's sort of like disgusted with this thing. And this goes on for a couple minutes, and everybody moves around a little bit, and the snake keeps foraging, and eventually it leaves, and the what did we say this was? The jawfish just sits there kind of in disbelief that this has happened to him. And I just got a kick out of it. An under-over attempt. I've got a 6-inch dome port, which I understand is not the easiest to do under-over. It's also not easy when you're in the water, because when you lift the camera up, you go down, right? So what was over becomes under.
So what lens were you using here?
That's a good question. I'd have to check and see what it says in the library. At most, it would have been my 15 to 55, the stock lens that comes with the SL2. Wasn't the fisheye. The Sea Cortez, put it on your list. It's a magnificent place. The water is like glass. When you're not in the middle of these storms that blow across from the west, they can be hurricane-like, but otherwise than that, the water's like glass. There's a lot of opportunity for this sort of stuff. There's a lot of guano. These rise in desert. It's a desert sea. So I wanted to show you this photo out of interest. If you can see right here is a dam. And what the Spanish would do is they used the native people as slaves, of course, and they would get the guano from the mountain and they'd stack it all up in here. And then when the rains came, they'd load it all onto the boats as it got washed down. Pardon me, I got that backwards. They'd wash it down into here and save it, and then they'd mine it out and export it out. It was pretty interesting history. Again, it's a desert. Those are all cactus up top. The octopus, there's lots of octopus there, very colorful, rather friendly. This photo, favorite photo, this is King Neptune emerging out of the water. I looked at this and I just can't help it. It was a friend from, he became a friend from Bulgaria. And he got stopped trying to get back into the United States because he had flown into the United States to take a bus down from Phoenix to get into Mexico. When he went back, he was turned back at the US border because his passport said he'd entered the US by airplane. He had to go out by airplane. The poor guy had to go all the way around to Merida in order to get a flight out to get home. But I look at this photo and it's just it's not a fish. Come on, there you go. And quick story on this one. This is one of the bulls. Andy, whoops, what did I do? We went back. Let's see if we can get picked back up where it was. Play. There we go. So this is a bull. What do we got down there? We got sea lions, right? He's coming. This area here is all up to the surface, and he's coming down to let me know that I am not allowed near his girls. And he's pretty clear about it. There's another photo that's not here. He starts blowing bubbles, and he'll blow bubbles in your face and intimidate the hell out of you, and they're big. And it will stop you in your tracks, and I love them. And once you got used to the dance, it was okay, because when they come down, you go back a little bit. He's happy. Big, big, big guy. Just a little taste of what the Sea Cortez was like. It's all desert. I'm assuming that's an extinct volcano. And we're just about done here. Very warm.
Leaving
morning.
his house around 10 a.m.
What's that? Okay, I didn't catch that. And this is the last of it. Is a snorkel with pretty much juvenile, I'd say, whale sharks. And I thought that was pretty fitting to have one last shot of someone's tail going the other way. That's the typically what we get. All right, thank you very much.
All right.
I think we can-
Very good, Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Good night.
Stop share. There we go. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Very nice collection from all over.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to agree with that. The Sea Cortez, it's a nice spot to dive.
You know, I never would have guessed. And at first, I didn't care for it. It was all this macro stuff, and people were getting little sailfish plenties, and it was making me crazy. And then, you know, once I got into it, it's a pretty cool spot.
Yeah, so a lot of invertebrate life there. Plus
Yeah,
schools
yeah.
of fish and so. Oh, good, very good. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
And now we have Tom Gately, who has obviously presented a couple of times before, but this now is a very different, what I think will be a very useful presentation on trying to avoid having disasters like the one that Jim just said. We lost 2 days of shooting, and maybe that might fall under the data protection.
3 days.
3 days, okay, even worse. All right, so Tom, if
Yeah, so let me start by sharing my screen here. I know everybody can start seeing it, but I just want to make sure everybody can hear me as well.
Yep.
Okay, great. And I'm going to use the proverbial, can everybody see my screen? Like that's what Zoom is for. You're looking at my
Yes.
first title slide?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I actually came up with this idea because it's something that most of my career has been in risk and resiliency, and one of the sub-disciplines of that is information technology disaster recovery. Obviously, there's a lot of information associated with it. So what I thought I'd do was just talk a little bit about how I go about, or what my decision making is to minimize the chance that I'm going to lose images. And I'm just going to kind of walk it through from kind of like the before you ever, when you're first even looking at a camera, all the way through to, how are you going to protect the stuff kind of permanently. One of the things that the entire kind of session is geared around, let me just get this, is there's one theme out of all this. So if you learn nothing out of this, this is probably the most important. The concept that whatever you want to do, the goal you're trying to reach is to have uncorrupted data, duplicate images, stored separate, and in different media and different services, and as far away from each other and as soon as possible. That's really kind of what this all comes down to. So the idea is how do we accomplish that, when from camera selection all the way through. I'm going to go through relatively quickly on this because it's almost more of a checklist type of a thing. And I know that Whitney will be sending out the recording, so you can always go back to it. I also have an article that I actually wrote for landscape photography, because a lot of the principles are the same, that I'll be, glad to share with Whitney, and she can send that out as well. So just in terms of kind of what I was thinking in terms of the kind of the spectrum of the disaster recovery and protection, it really starts obviously prior to when you start taking the photos, and even when you're actually first selecting your camera, all the way through to how do I permanently protect this stuff so that if something does happen, whether it's to my house or to my computer or whatever else, is that I still got those images that I can get back. This, for those of you that haven't purchased a camera yet, or you're looking at upgrading, I think this is a really important feature that a lot of people don't necessarily consider. The idea that if you have the ability to choose a dual card camera, do it. Because we all know we've got reading and write errors on these memory cards. And this is frankly the best way to prevent and have a duplicate image, is with having two cards in the camera to begin with. If it's a single card, there's no way around it. If your camera is a single card camera, there's no way around really that vulnerability you have up to a certain point, and then you can start to increase your resilience. But there's not a lot you can do without actually having two cards in the camera. The other thing is format it in format the camera, the card in the camera itself. I'm not actually sure the technological reasons for this, but there's a greater failure rate and corruption when you end up formatting the camera, the card in the computer, and then using it in the camera. So they always recommend, format it in the camera, and the uniqueness of the camera actually ends up reducing the actual amount of corruption. Goes without saying, you get what you pay for. These happen to be the cards that I like in terms of brand names. There's a lot of different brand names, but this is not the place to save money. When you're buying memory cards, buy the best that you can, and look at it as like buy once, buy nice kind of a philosophy with this. If you ever have any error on the card, a lot of people are like, oh, you can reformat it, it'll be fine, or it'll format and write out the bad disk and everything else. My entire career being built around this is, you could say that I'm paranoid. I'd like to say that I'm a little bit more risk aware. The minute that an error starts occurring, to me, that just basically says that the frequency of these errors are going to continue to occur. And I've had it where I've ended up with corrupted images because I ignored that kind of first error. And even though I reformatted and it should have been fine, I lost an entire series of Bryce Canyon images as a result of that. So the minute you get anything with these, or they're showing anything, is change it out and use a new one. Same thing kind of goes to just regularly replace the cards. I was looking at the mean time between failure, which is what MTBF stands for, and it's like 100,000 read-write cycles, which is absurd. And you think, well, God, why would you ever need to change out an SD card until you've had these things fail because they've gotten kind of beaten up, especially in the environment that we use. With the salt water, the terminals get corroded. I just regularly change them out, and I usually change my cards less by how often that I'm using them, by no more than 3 years old. So the minute I get to about 3 years old, I usually just change them out, regardless of the fact that they may have life in them, simply because it's so hard to recreate the image that the cards are cheap relative to the experience. So just kind of my advice on this. And by the way, a lot of this is opinion. There is some that is based in facts, which I'd be glad to share with people offline or afterward in questions and things. But generally, these are mostly born out of my own experiences, unfortunately. So hopefully you guys can learn from my disasters instead of having your own, like Jim's, because I think Jim, you and I share, we share camera flooding experiences. And then this is just, I'm putting this up because how can you not talk about antivirus when you're talking about data protection? Cybersecurity today, corrupted images from malware, all those things is a very real thing. And part of that ties into the fact of not only are you going to just want to run the antivirus, but you also want to make sure that the images that you're uploading are actually uncorrupted, or at some point with all your images stored in a place is that you have a permanent repository at some point in time where if you find your corruptions, like you ended up having a malware event or whatever else, or ransomware, whatever it happens to be, is that you can go back to a point where, yeah, I lost 6 months or I lost a year's worth, but at least I didn't lose 20 years worth. So you actually have permanent, preservation of some of these things. And the other is a lot of people forget this part, is regularly update the firmware on your camera. It's a pretty straightforward process. The one thing I'll say about it is do not interrupt it while it's going on, or you may brick your camera. And bricking means you basically turn it into a nice paperweight until you send it back into the service center, because firmware updates do not like to be interrupted or shut down or disrupted. It's like the old, updates are in progress, please do not turn off your computer. Same kind of thing happens with this, but it's more likely to occur. Before the dives, and I'm concentrating just on the O-rings and seals because that seems to be, the most frequent thing that we miss. We do a great job of cleaning them, and then you have one hair that lands across an O-ring, and that's all it takes. So before I actually seal the camera and rely on the vacuum and leak detection systems that I'll talk about in a minute, I always do a double check on this, especially with the fact that a lot of people over lube their O-rings, which ends up turning into like a magnetic and just a dust and hair trap. So you want to basically check the seals. And I use in terms of the grooves themselves, is I do use. And Asli, I think you're on this, is you will cringe because it's a throwaway at them, but the mascara foam brushes, these little tiny foam brushes that you have, I will use those to go around the actual groove that the O-ring sits in to clean out the grooves themselves, so that there's nothing even trapped behind the O-ring that I'm unaware of. For dual card cameras, if you do have the dual card camera, you have different ways of setting these things up. And invariably, the default they set it is to overflow. And I usually, as a matter of fact, I always go in and I change it to backup. So the idea is that each card is getting an exact image of what you're capturing, so that each card is actually a replica of the other card. And usually they're even in different formats. So if something's happening in the card, like one is an XQD card or a CF card and the other is an SD card. So it's, again, minimizing the chance of corruption. But if one does get corrupted for whatever reason, you've got two cards. The other thing is that if you actually do flood, these are pretty resilient these days, and there's a lot of things you can do to get your images back. Having two cards increases the chances that if you can't get them back from one card, you might be able to get them back from the other one. So again, going back to setting it up to make sure it's in a backup as opposed to an overflow mode, which means that overflow being nothing more than it fills up the first card, then it goes to the second card. So if you have 64 gigabytes of memory cards in your camera, instead of having 128, it's actually 64, but they're duplicated. Stop me, by the way, if you have any questions, or because I'm not really looking at the comment section or chat, so just feel free to jump in if you've got any questions. The other thing is don't fill the cards to capacity. We always have the urge, and it's kind of funny that we do that because we're thinking, oh, we can fill it all the way up. You increase the likelihood of corruption, of data corruption, when you get above 75% of the card capacity. So in this case, I'm actually showing a picture of my camera where, formatted and fresh, I've got 801 possible images that I can take. Every camera is a little bit different because of the size that it writes to the files. So you go by the number of images rather than by the amount of storage space that it has. And in this case, when I hit about 600 images, I'll change it out. Being paranoid, I'm saying that as 75%. Being paranoid is I tend to change it out either at the end of the day of the dives or usually at about half that. Because I don't find that I'm not really a spray and pray person. So getting to 300 images on my camera takes a lot of shooting, and usually more than I'll do in a single day anyway.
Hey, Tom,
Yes.
do you, instead of deleting photos, like once you've like backed up your stuff, do you just like reformat the SD cards?
Yes. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about like when to do that, because that's really critical. Going back to what Jim had mentioned earlier, the idea that when you're deleting cards, there's a chance of in error making deletions that you don't want. So you want to make sure that your backups are already established and validated before you start reformatting your cards. Did that answer your question?
Oh, sorry. I just meant like, so rather than deleting photos like individually to like maintain that like lower value, just like start fresh again.
Yeah.
Right.
So the way I do it is I start with one card. I start with the two cards in. I'll go to 300 typically if I've got 800 in there, but sometimes I go more, but I will not push it past 75%, because again, I have had that actually happen too. Is I pushed it past at about a 90% and I corrupted the card. It shouldn't have happened. It did happen. So I just kind of consider that I've got bad luck. So I tend to run a little bit more cautious on that. And I only reuse and reformat the card after I've done all of my backups and validated them. So the reason I bring up the leak detection, the vacuum systems, this is my camera, by the way. This was a D810, Nikon D810 with a 16-35mm lens in it, a housing. It's half full of ocean water from Nubble Light. That was an expensive loss. And so even though I really don't bring it up specifically in this, I buy insurance, and I'm glad I had the insurance on this, even with a 10% co-deductible, because this is about a 10 grand loss. It made the insurance worth it every year that I pay for that premium. So if you don't have it, I would go through Dan. I found that Dan was first off, the claim adjustment process was really simple, and it was very fast. And I half expected them to consider me a bad risk and then not insure me the next time, but they just turned around and wrote the next policy right away. So they're not risk averse from that perspective, and there's enough of us buying it that they can support multiple losses, I think. The reason I also bring this up is this loss, the reason it was so expensive is that it wasn't just the water and the camera. It was actually the dome, the extension port, and the housing that went as well, not because of the electronics. Normally after a loss like this, they'll clean out the electronics or replace the electronics. I don't have it here, but there's also a spray, and I forget the name of it, And I'll track it down and send it to Whitney. But there's a spray that actually, instead of like, everybody talks about, oh, you put it in rice or clean water or deionized water, whatever else. This is actually a solvent that you're spraying on it, and it wicks the water away and it dries clean. So it actually removes the corrosion. It removes the water and it removes the bodies that are in there at the same time. So it's specifically for water damaged electronics. And it's the downside is if I remember, it's about $50 a can, but it's a can that you're going to want to have if you really need, because then you can spray down your electronics and potentially save them. The reason this was such a big thing was I actually hit this with a vacuum system, and a lot of people talk about vacuum systems as kind of protection, and they're great for creating that really tight seal right up until the moment that you break that tight seal, and then it becomes a vacuum suck. And it pulls in that entire, what ended up happening is I hit it sideways. So there's a shear force on it. And I ended up damaging the flanges of the dome and the port and the housing. So they were all a loss. But on top of it, in an instant, it pulled in half of that. All that water came in a flash instant because it was under a vacuum, and the vacuum pulled the water in. So while they're great to prevent it, if you do break that seal, they're fantastic at filling up that housing. So just kind of a fair warning on vacuum systems with that. And of course, the leak detection is screaming its head off, and you're going great. The other thing that I want to point out when this happens, and this happened to me again, going back to another leak, is I was in Truck Lagoon, and I had the leak detector go off. And a minute, you flip it down, you look at the dome, there's just a tiny little amount of water in there. And I kept it in that dome down position when I went back up to the surface, thinking, okay, this is not a big deal. It hasn't hit my camera or anything else. I handed it off to the people on the boat. I'm saying, I had a leak, I'm going back down. And he goes, great. He takes the camera. I went back with my GoPro. But in the meantime, he took it and he put it into the rinse tank. And then it continued to suck in water until it completely flooded the housing because of the vacuum system again. So again, I could have prevented the whole thing. I should have been much more specific about keep it face down, do not put it in the rinse tank. So if it ever happens to you where you have a leak and you're going to continue your dive with a GoPro or something, keep that in mind, because that also ended up in a loss for me when it didn't need to be. You can see why I'm kind of like paranoid. It's just bad luck.
We have things in common, Tom.
There's things that you just don't think of. And to that end is, I also say avoid the unattended rinse tank. I actually don't use rinse tanks at all, because not only do they just, everybody throws their camera in there and they're bouncing around and they're scratching domes, but they're also it's just ripe for, that sideways hit, the break of the vacuum that's on the housing. There are more leaks that occur in rinse tanks, I swear, than actually on the dives. Not to mention the fact that it does a beautiful job of creating nice gouges on acrylic domes. When a person who doesn't have that kind of camera throws like their GoPro with their handle in it, and the nice bolt scratches down the front of it. So I skip rinse tanks completely. The other thing is that invariably, and it just happened to me on the other dive, I watched somebody rinse their mask off in a rinse tank to take the defog off. And now you've got essentially a degreaser, which is going to shorten the maintenance life on your O-rings and everything else, because all those buttons and everything else that every time you start pushing those buttons to help rinse it out and get rid of any kind of the salt pieces are introducing a degreaser into there. And now you're going to end up doing an overhaul on it in a shorter time period and getting stiffer buttons. So I just skip them. Just my advice. The other thing is basically know your risk tolerance. Mine personally, when I'm traveling, and I'm going to talk specifically kind of about traveling in these next few top points. Mine about traveling is really one day. I don't want to lose more than a day's image. So I don't want to really break the seal of the camera during a 210, during the day if I'm diving, especially if I'm less than that 300 kind of images. But at the end of the day, I always break it. I always take out the cards and I put new cards in. Because I don't want to lose more than a day's worth of images, especially on those week and 10-day long dive trips or longer. Your camera capacity with the cards these days, you could go an entire trip and never change it, but that if you flood it on the last day, you've now lost it all the way back to the beginning of the trip potentially. So memory cards are cheap is kind of my message here, but decide for yourself kind of what am I willing to lose. As I use cards, I identify them as used. So in the cases that I've got is I do a couple of things. The first thing is I flip over the cards that are used versus the cards that are new. And then the other thing I do is I lock the card. So two things are happening to prevent me from overwriting that card, which kind of goes back to the earlier comment is I never ever delete images when I am traveling and I haven't created the backups yet and I haven't validated the backups because the backups are worthless until you actually validate them. And validating means you download them again and see if they actually work, if you can access your backed up images. And on SD cards, it's really easy. You just flip up that little lock. And if you try to shoot with it, you get an error message on your cameras. This one is, I think, probably going to generate the most conversation if of any of the slides, because I don't like to travel with a computer. So what I use is, and if I was doing this today, what you see here are actually two spinning hard disks that I have. I mark one as a backup, I mark one as a primary, and that device you see down there below is called a file hub. It's by RAV Power, and they have a couple of different versions. I got a newer version now that's faster. But essentially what it is it's marketed as a wireless router and a file hub. But what's really nice about it is you can control it with an app on your smartphone or on your iPad. So what I do is, and also in the card, you can't see it, but right on the side of the actual hub itself is an SD reader. So you can actually pop in your SD card and the file hub reads it. And then using the app is I would transfer the files simultaneously using, and I don't show it in here, but I actually have a USB strip with 4 ports and you can identify to the primary and backup. So I'm sending files to both of those every night. So I'm getting the images off the card and I'm getting them onto a primary hard drive and a backup hard drive duplicate again. Then
you're saving
go ahead, Jim.
Then you're saving the card still, I take it, because you're not able to see the photos.
Exactly. I'm keeping, actually at this point, I have triplicate copies of my images. Yes. And the cards are being stored. And then what I do is with the used cards is I put that in that flipped over motion when I'm like on a boat, you know, if I'm taking them out there, or if I haven't gotten to it, just so that I don't know. But what I do is I have a kind of a working case, and then I have the used case. And then ultimately the used case is just used cards. So I even minimize the chance that I'm going to mistake a new one for a used one if I open up the case and they fall out on me, for instance. So yeah, I've actually got triplicate images at this point. And if I did this today, there's like the SanDisk has an Extreme Pro that's water resistant, and it's an SSD, which is a faster read write. I would use that and I'd probably get the newer RAV Power again, because it does a faster read write of the images. And the images I generate off my Nikon are fairly significant. So this process can take 45 minutes to do the full transfer. The other thing that's nice about this is it's also a power bank. So in this case, I think it's like 800, 8,000 milliamps or something. So you don't even have to plug it into power while you're running it. It will spin and run the hard disk and everything else. And the nicest thing about this is you don't have to have a computer, and you can view them. You actually can view the images on your smartphone just to kind of double check. But I don't even bother doing that as long as I see the file names have gone. Any questions on that? Because this is the one that I think a lot of people ask me the most questions about.
So
Is there?
go ahead, Jim.
Is there a reason you're using a spinning disk rather than a solid state backup?
Yeah, because I started doing this in 2012. So essentially these discs are old. They're older discs, and I've got that in this picture. I actually took this from an older picture of mine. I'm actually, it's in my shopping cart now, is I am going to be buying the new SSDs just for speed. And they're more reliable. They're less likely to end up, having a hard drive failure. I would still use 2 though, just because they can still corrupt and they can still damage.
These are 10 years old, right? I mean, you're talking.
Yeah, they're 10 years old, but I do go on the lifetime of these. Is I only use these discs for my travel.
Okay.
So they're used probably 3 or 4 times a year.
Gotcha.
So I'm not too overly concerned about the fact that they're older, because they haven't run that long. Which is both good and bad. I mean, because there's a time where when you're first running them, they're most likely to fail, then they're less likely to fail, then they're more likely to fail again. And I think I'm pretty much a number of years in that sweet spot. So Andy, you're going to ask something?
Yeah, a couple of questions. How big are those hard drives?
So these right now these are 2 terabytes. I would probably buy the 4 terabyte ones. Again, memory is relatively inexpensive. I know it's still a big chunk out of the wallet, but I wouldn't go less than 2 terabytes simply because my flash cards in my camera now are 128 gigs. So, and it adds up.
Yeah.
But,
And
yeah, I would say buy as big as you can afford in an SSD. That would be my recommendation these days. And I would definitely do one that is the kind of the weather resistant, water resistant to like the 2 meters, in case it does drop. These, the discs never actually go on the boat with me, by the way. So I am, the camera is still, I keep the camera in the housing until I come off the boat, if I'm on a boat or the shore dive at the end of the day. I tend not to break that, break the housing. The only thing I will break is the battery compartments for the strobes, because that's what I'm more worried about.
and not taking a computer, is that weight?
Yeah, it's, if I was doing it all today, I'd have a mirrorless system and I'd be buying an OM1 and everything would be a nice, small, compact mirrorless. I do not want one more piece of item if I can avoid it. Even the weight of the SSD versus these discs, they're bigger. So I like the SSDs more for that reason. And then I store the cards, the primary and the backup drive separately. If I'm down there with other people, I actually store them in their hotel rooms. So I will separate them by hotel room. I'll have my primary and I have a backup with whoever I'm traveling with, and they do vice versa. Paranoid? Yeah. Paranoid much? Yeah. Get a good case, good waterproof case to hold the your SD cards. These are relatively cheap. Rugged makes some, Pelican makes some. You can get them for B&H, and they're relatively inexpensive to get. And then I never reuse cards during a trip because I don't want to inadvertently delete something that I didn't mean to delete, and I don't actually want to touch them or have them in a computer or read them any more than I absolutely necessary until I get back from my trip. So once I'm back, automated backup application service. This is you're actually looking at control panels from Backblaze. I love Backblaze, and you can see if you look down in the where it says selected for backup and that one to the left hand side. I have about 10.5 terabyte of images right now. And at 10.5 terabyte of images on some of the backup services is a lot of money. On Backblaze, it's $60 a year. So they have an unlimited amount of backup. The other thing I really like about Backblaze, and you should be cautious when you choose, the upload, the online services, whether it's an iCloud. There used to be Carbon backup, I forget the name of it, but
Carbon copy cloner?
What's that?
Is it carbon copy cloner? Is that?
Yeah, I think that might be it. But you didn't until you got to the fine print. They basically, after you went like 250 megabytes, they started to slow down your upload speed. So even though you had fast internet and super connections, it would take days and days to upload backups. Whereas Backblaze, you can actually throttle it to anything you want. This case, it's just showing 33 gigs a day. That's only because when I did the screenshot of this is we were working, my wife was doing a heavy download, I was doing a heavy download. So it was like this. Another time it'd be 133 gigs a day or 500 gigs a day. So you can actually adjust it to say, go ahead and consume all my computer resources in order to get these uploads, which I really like the ability to go in and choose how fast I can upload this stuff. The other thing I do is I have Backblaze running. Paranoid much again, is I also run 2 network attached storage devices. And they're each 4 disk storage devices. And in this case, what is the total capacity on this one is 16. The other one I think is 12. But the idea is that I can have, so while it's on my computer, and what I'm talking about considering like on-site work and on-site backup and on-site, and off-site backup is I load the images when I'm working with them on a scratch or a working disk that's an SSD that's very fast, so that I don't have any lag when I'm actually doing my processing. At the same time that's happening, they're being synced back to my network attached storage devices on my network. And in those 4 drives, and it's going to one of 2 of the NASs, with those 4 drives and the way I've set it up, and you'll have heard, redundant array of inexpensive disk or RAID and different things. There's different ways to set these up. I really like Synology, only because Synology maximizes your kind of storage with what they call their hybrid RAID. And what that means is I can lose one of those 4 disks and I immediately get error messages, and yet all the data exists. I can literally hot swap replace it, put a new disk in, it will rewrite, and I haven't lost anything. even upon one disk failure, which I really, really like. And at the same time, it's backing up into the offsite backup of Backblaze. And then the part that the other part of this that I do, talking about kind of the long-term protection, is I will do a local manual backup of my entire library. And in my case, I actually have a wood shop out in my back. I take that, and every 6 months is I take a cheap spinning disk and I put a permanent 6-month backup. So I actually take that backup with my entire thing on a 12 terabyte and I move it out into the back end of my wood shop so that the house can burn down and flood out and I'm good. The services can fail and I'm good. And I still have the speed. The reason I like the permanent one is because of content, if it's corrupted somehow from malware, something that's not immediately evident, I can go back in multiple disks and have a permanent archive that doesn't mean that before it could have been contaminated. Which is what I like. The other thing that's nice about having, kind of like local complete backups is that even Backblaze, you either take a long time to download, 12 terabyte download is going to take a long time, or you can pay them to send disks to you, hard disks that you can do, but you're paying for those hard disks. So it's a nice way to avoid that in retrospect. And then only after I've done all of that and I'm confirmed that it's in the cloud and they're backed up and I don't download all of them again to test it. I will download a few to make sure that I can access it. The other thing about Backblaze I like is you can actually go from anywhere in the world and it becomes like iCloud and it's an online repository that you can go in and select individual things. But being automated like it is, it rips it all up there. And then I select like 2 or 3 random files, download them and make sure I can read them. So I don't do a complete validation, but I do a test validation. And then and only then do I actually reformat my hard drives. And the last thing is there are data recovery diagnostic companies that will, diagnostics on SD cards and companies that will actually help restore, if you need to. So that's kind of the checklist of all the things that I've got. One kind of final reminder, you've probably gathered that, I'm a Murphy's Law advocate. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong and at the worst possible moment. I have a corollary to that. He was a friggin' optimist. So with that, I will take any questions if you guys have any questions at all or anything that you want, and I will stop sharing the screen at this point.
Wow. So Tom, have you thought about therapy?
Yeah, so this is why this is like my professional life is risk management in this case. I do have tolerance, but I manage.
No, these are great idea, great points. It really is.
I don't think Tom's a good candidate for therapy, actually.
Hey, Tom?
Yeah.
There is no help for him at this point. He's gone.
Yeah, I know. I'm out of here. It's like
Tom, I was wondering with your Synology network storage, do you Backblaze that as well, or you just Backblaze off your home computer, and your storage is like your local cloud, and that doesn't also get backed up to Backblaze?
So, yeah, so I actually I tier my data. All my images, and this is the most important for me, goes up right off the computer as well as going to the Synology. And then other data that's less important, like what I do for my living, only goes up to Backblaze.
Okay.
The work files are just completely separate, secondary to me. The fact that I can get it, I'm more comfortable with, and generally those are always shared. So there's duplicates elsewhere. But with my images, I know no one else is going to have them. So I do tier kind of my data and the degree of protection I do for each of the kind of like categories. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Anything else? I'm looking just okay, so Joyce, with you're saying kind of like it's slower. I haven't noticed that. I've only used the SSDs in my computer, so it's on the bus. And I use some of the fast ones because I know there's different speeds. Some of the SSDs are much faster read write than other SSDs, so I know like they're not all the same. So I don't have experience with the portable ones. Is just how fast they read and write relative to the spinning disk, but that's a great point. And then I think
I had a question.
Yeah.
I had a question. When you're at the point through whatever mechanism where you're going to wipe out your card, what's your experience with reformatting versus deleting all the images?
I do a reformat because deleting the images, you can still potentially leave bad sectors behind that you might not be aware of, whereas a reformat actually can identify if there's been bad sectors that have been identified that I'm unaware of that didn't show up in an error. So what I do is I at the end, after I've done all this, is I put each card, and I have cards in pairs, and I tend to keep them together as pairs so I don't mix and match. And I will reformat both of them in camera, take them out, put them in fresh, take the next ones, put them into the camera. So I'll spend 15 minutes reformatting cards in sequence. Did that answer your question, Joyce? I mean, Ellen.
It was Ellen, but yes.
Yeah. Any other questions? I appreciate the opportunity to present. And so if you have anything else, you can always just fire me an email or let Whitney know, and she can get me a question. I will pass along. I do have, like I said, the blog article that I wrote, and I'll send a link to that as well.
Right. It's very, very useful and very informative. So this was terrific. I'm sure everyone, whatever phase you are in photography, will certainly benefit from what we just saw from Tom. Tom, I can add one more flood story. And I kind of wish these days were back, but on a very early trip, this is in the days of the Nokonos, flooded the Nokonos. This is a Nokonos 2, so give you an idea how long ago it was. And it was the first day in the trip, and it was on a liveaboard, Paul Human's boat. So I poured, and I don't remember whether it was vodka or gin, into the camera, rinsed it around, put in some fresh water, and then put a hairdryer on it, and I was good to go.
And if you're lucky, you still had a half bottle of gin to wash away all your worries.
Well, I did save some of the gin. But yeah, because it was absolutely, the camera did nothing for you in terms of, in general, it didn't have anything what it has today, but it was something to be said for that.
You know, I kind of think of, once you've got salt water in there, nothing matters. Try anything if you want. You know, I mean, literally, if you've got a straight distillate, go for it. You know,
Yeah.
If you've got just tap water instead of deionized water, go for it. You know, I mean, anything will make it potentially better than leaving salt water just to start corroding over time.
Corroding immediately.
Yeah.
I
I'll see if I can
haven't-
track down that spray though, because that
Yeah.
because I saw somebody that actually had that, and I looked it up later, and it seemed almost like too good to be true. But at $50 a can, I figured maybe it is as good as true, because you get what you pay for. So
Yeah, if you can get the name of that to Whitney, that'd be terrific.
I have a non-flooding story. This was early on when I had my G16. I was in Blue Heron Bridge. So in the morning, we packed, we went for a dive, probably 2.5 hours of dive. We come home. By the way, like, I do none of the things Tom does, like none. I have only one copy of the images I have in one of the hard drives lying around. I have no idea. Anyway, I come home, and on the kitchen sink, I see my O-ring hanging.
Ooh.
I forgot to put the O-ring. Thank God it had like double O-rings. I have no idea how that camera survived. Like, I had no idea. But then 2 years later, I flooded 2 cameras in 2 dives in a row. So with both O-rings.
not to mention the strobes you've been killing lately. Sorry, is that a bad one to bring up?
Yeah, I should be more like, be like Tom. Yeah.
Well, now on a lighter note, Mike Avery will take us to Mexico. So we'll see a little bit of the east coast of Mexico. So, Mike, if you could.
All right, let me just turn on the
All right.
sharing here.
Early on, when you first appeared tonight, you had a Mexican blanket behind you. I thought that was in preparation for your trip. And now I see.
Oh, yeah. All right, I think, so can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Looks good.
Mhm.
Okay, first up, we have a nurse shark. Opportunistic predator here. Appears to have spotted a spiny lobster in a crack.
Wow.
And looking on, there is a black grouper and a triggerfish looking for some free table scraps. This was taken at a site called Punta Tunich in Cozumel. And while I was shooting this, I was actually, if you notice all the debris, how fast it's moving aside, I'm finning like crazy to stay in position because I'm in a current.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, how did you do that? Cozumel is not kind.
And then eventually, I'm not sure if the nurse shark was successful or not, but it swims off and seems to be a little dejected.
Wow.
Next up, we have a hermit crab doing some kind of imitation of a paper shredder. This particular shot was taken with the Olympus TG5 in macro mode. I particularly like this video just because of how crazy the behavior of the hermit crab is. I had never seen this before this particular instance.
And how close were you to the crab?
I was probably about a foot away.
Where was it taken?
This was taken in Palancar Gardens off of Cozumel.
Any idea what it is he's eating?
I have no idea.
Looks like he's taking the algae or something that's off the little chips of shells.
Yeah,
He has them and then he spits them out. So it looks like he's gleaning something from that.
this is a snacking turtle that gets photobombed. This is another one in Palancar Caves. It was supposed to be a video of this hawksbill sea turtle having a snack, but this angelfish and a wrasse decided it was a video about photobombing. I mean, clearly the angelfish knows that he's much prettier than the sea turtle.
Okay.
Mhm. They both eat sponge, so maybe it's around there to pick up.
Yeah,
scraps.
looking for a free snack. Now here we have a scrawled filefish. They tend to be shy around divers, but this guy didn't seem to mind me at all. And this was a good size fish. It's probably about 2 feet long. And much like an octopus, the colors can vary. This was shot with the paralens. I particularly like this one because of the beauty of the color. I was able to really coax some nice colors out of this shot. And here we have a French angelfish off of Columbia Reef. Angelfish are some of my favorite subjects. They vary widely in color, and they're pretty fearless. I've gotten some pretty close shots to angelfish. And this guy didn't seem to mind me following him around at all.
Is that with your old parallels or Vaquita?
This is the Vaquita. Now here we have what I call the cowfish dance. This is a pair of mating cowfish. This behavior is them attempting to procreate. I just love cowfish, boxfish in general. I think they're so adorable. And I try to capture shots of these guys every chance I get.
Mhm.
And I noticed in particular off of Cozumel, there was a lot of cowfish. Now, this one, initially the shot was going to be the subject with these French grunts until I got in under this crack and realized there was a giant eel sitting there. This kind of took me by surprise. This guy was probably about 2 meters long. Now this one was at a site called Columbia Deep. We were about 100 feet down and I was swimming under a crevice. So this was shot with natural light, believe it or not. This lobster was probably about 2 feet long, big guy. Now we have another sea turtle. This is an example of how strong the currents are off of Cozumel. You can see here he bounces off the sponge. And then he kind of dodges a rock outcropping. Yoop. And then does something of a face plant. And then heads off over the sand. In the meantime, I'm trying to stay in position to keep them in frame as we're both getting swept along by the current.
Play that one again. That's crazy.
Now here we have a juvenile trunkfish. This again was shot with the TG5, which I use solely for the macro stuff. I use the paralens for the wide angle. I love these little guys. They're just so adorable. This was probably about a ½ inch in size. Although as adults, they can grow to be over a foot.
The TG5 in a housing?
Yes. Yeah, I have the Olympus housing for the TG5. And I got another cowfish. This is a honeycomb cowfish. They have armor-like scales that cover most of its body, which gives it its name, the honeycomb pattern, and then the horns. This was shot with the paralens.
Original, Brikia. Michael.
The original paralens. Now here we have one thing I like to do is I like to do swim throughs. This is Palancar Gardens. I'm about 80 feet below the surface and just making my way through these cracks and crevices under the reef. And I look up and, oh yeah, that's wide enough. I can fit through that. Let me find something a little tighter. So I look over here and oh, that crack looks really small. Let's see if I can fit through that. Oh, there's another little crack. I think I'll try and get through that one too. Basically, if my camera handle will fit through the crack, I'll try to squeeze through myself. So now we jump across to Cancun, and this was one of the cenotes. This is called the Pit. And if you can look past the unflattering name, you'll find one of the most beautiful and unique cenotes in Mexico. The entrance is steep and narrow, and divers have to use pulleys to get their tanks in and out of the water. You actually go down this steep staircase to get to the surface of the water. And you'll see at the end of the video how the pulley system works. The deepest part of the pit is 40 meters down and actually has caverns that stretch down over 400 feet deep. They tell you before you get in the cenote that make sure you have everything on you secured, because if you drop anything, it is gone. And one of the appealing parts of this is catching the light beams. So here you can see us at the end of the dive. There's a gentleman who stands at the top of that platform and works for tips, just lugging the divers' tanks and BCDs in and out of the cenote. You have to climb down to get into the pit, and then you put your fins on at the edge, jump in the water, and then they lower down your tanks and BCDs, and you have to gear up while you're in the water. This is another cenote. This is Taj Mahal. It's an absolutely magnificent cenote. The first explorers named it the Taj Mahal, but the word ha in Mayan means water, so it was changed from Taj Mahal to Taj Mahal to Taj Mahal. And there's actually some Mayan remains in this particular cenote. So those are some of the sites that you can see when you are diving off of the Caribbean side of Mexico.
Oh, that's terrific. Oh, and now is this one trip or
Yes.
compilation? Oh, it is one trip.
Yep, it was one trip. We, me and a group of buddies went down for several days. We spent a week drift diving in Cozumel, and then we took the ferry to get to the mainland and did 3 days of cenotes in Cancun.
Well, that's a great trip.
It was really, really fun, especially like I liked Cozumel quite a bit. We ended up exploring the back roads and finding all of these little hole in the wall places to eat, and it was a lot of fun.
You went last year.
Oh. When did you do that?
This was last year.
Terrific. Get some great video from there.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike?
Yeah, Mike, so clearly you don't have as much bioprene as I do.
Yeah.
So when in the earlier part where you're like squeezing through kind of the cracks and stuff, are you doing the back mounted? Is it side mount that you're running? How do you,
Oh no,
how do you
no,
get through
just
those?
my regular BCD back mount. I usually on that particular dive, I was toting a 120 steel 120.
Okay.
So it was kind of bulky, but I try very hard to make sure I don't come in contact with anything. I'm very careful as far as making sure that as I mentioned, I use my camera rig as a gauge to see whether or not I'm going to be able to fit. So I have my arms spread out to either side, so they're wide enough that I know that if I can get my lights through, my shoulders will fit.
You're making me laugh because I'm thinking, wow, I got to buy a bigger camera rig because
it's
that's time
actually
I want to get smaller ones, you know.
Yep. I actually have a tight little setup. It's not that big. It's the little backscatter 2-handle tray with the TG5 mounted in the middle, and then the paralens is on the cold shoe on top of the TG5 housing.
I'm still amazed at the pictures you can get off and the video you can get off of a TG, especially the 4, 5, and 6. It's amazing.
Yeah, they're nice little cameras.
Yeah.
But even the paralens, that segment of the spiny lobster at 100 feet at available light.
Yeah.
Oh, the paralens is actually
impressive.
fantastic when it comes to low light. And the new one in particular is fantastic. It does a great job.
Oh, great stuff. Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you very much. And so that's it for tonight. And one more time, I ask if there's anyone has something they'd like to show some of their favorites for the July meeting. We do have an opening. And also, if you could let Whitney know, Whitney and I were talking the other day about doing, or having another photo society dive in Cape Ann. So if anyone is interested, I guess sometime maybe in middle or latter part of July, or if August works better, we could do that too. I mean, we did it, the last time we did, I believe it was in September, so. In the, if you let Whitney know, and even if, what month you prefer, so then we can figure out which, when to have it, so. Anyway, all of you, Jim and Tom and Mike, thank you very much. Made a great program tonight.
Thank you.
And Whitney, thank you for hosting all this. And happy shooting, and see you next month.
Thank
night.
you.
Bye.
Have a good
night.
night.
Hey, everybody, thank you.
That was a good program tonight, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Very, very good.
Yeah, something different. It's
Yeah.
useful. I have a lot of corrupt SD cards.
Yeah, actually, I was taking notes of what Tom was saying was a lot of good ideas, and there's some things that I don't do and that he does, and I can see the value in it, so